Manually encoded English is a family of communication systems designed to depict spoken English in a way more accessible to deaf children. These aren't natural languages, but rather are communication systems designed to depict the structure of an oral language using the words or parameters of a signed one. MCs can show phonetic information like the various kinds of cued speech, or more lexical grammatical ones, as does the hero of our story tonight, an MCE by the name of Signing Exact English 2. Because they had to make 2 for some reason. Okay, shouldn't be so negative right off the bat. MCs do actually have their uses. They come up a lot in speech therapy for patients who are either relearning speech or who just don't talk. And they're also useful as accessibility tools for deaf children who are ASL. They're often ASL or BSL natives. And for uses like these, they're absolutely wonderful. Where me and other deaf and hard of hearing people take issue is when these are used as a replacement for sign language due to the idea that oral language is fundamentally superior to sign. Instead of just using natural sign grammar, our words are warped and stretched to fit the superior oral grammar, leading to some very strange structures. But why does crossing the modality boundary yield such strange effects? And how can hearing people viscerally understand how C2 feels compared to real sign? Tonight's show is an attempt to answer some of these questions, but be warned. Beyond the curtain, your typical analyses will be flipped inside out, for my entry to the cursed Conlang Circus 4 flips the very idea of a manually encoded oral language on its head. Welcome, one and all, to Tzasang, the spoken exact sign language. First, we need a little context for what the issue is here. Sign languages are just wrapped in misconceptions, with the root of most of these being the idea that oral language is just a fundamentally superior way to communicate, just in all circumstances, and that sign is some kind of primitive or artificial pre-language system. Actually, let's run through some misconceptions real quick, and make sure we're all on the same page. Well, there's just sign language, just one. There's actually a lot of them, all over the whole world. But aren't sign language all just based on the spoken languages of their areas? This could mean a lot of things, all of which are wrong. The sign languages aren't just relexes of the dominant spoken language, and nor is there like a one-to-one of sign to speech. You have American Sign Language and British Sign Language, which are completely unrelated languages. Okay, so they have different grammars, but it's still the same basis as speech, right? No, actually. Well, they share basics, of like having grammar and having syntax and phonology and stuff. Sign languages express a lot of notions differently from speech, using 3D space, special verb forms, Wait, phonology? Yeah, we'll get to it, but very basically, signs are made up of these 5 parameters, each of which stack according to phonotactic rules to build syllables and words. But aren't sign languages all just conlangs anyway? No, and this attitude is frustratingly common in conlanging spaces. Sign languages develop their grammar naturally, just like spoken languages. They even form very large language families over time as they evolve. And while sign languages are often the site of intentional creation efforts by deaf and hearing people, for better or worse, that doesn't take away from the fact that they are naturally originating languages. A lot of these misconceptions tie back to an educational philosophy known as oralism, the idea that the deaf and hard of hearing should learn oral language only, because it's better for us. I'm sure one can see the connection to anti-sign attitudes. It's contrasted with manualism, which uses gestural systems, including natural sign language, cued speech, and the Rochester method, aka, all finger spelling. Oralism won out over manualism with the Milan Conference of 1880, a conference where many learned hearing men all gathered in Milan to debate the matter, and, it might just be better for me to show you. Good evening. It is evident from all study of the lives of the deaf that the German oral method is by far the superior option, owing to its facile implementation of oral and conversational skills in its students. Indeed, one would be a fool to insist on a system of half-legible gestures and finger spelling, the use of which amounts to naught but a social handicap and is not befitting those of... Yeah, not great. Thankfully, these attitudes were not long-lived at all, and society very quickly progressed. This insistence by a radical few that signs somehow constitute a real language is frankly absurd. We need to be focusing on real, legible sign systems like cute speech or signed English, rather than running off in fantasyland pretending there's such a thing as grammar in sign languages. Please. Turns out oralism is just the beast that will not die. Thanks to campaigning from horrible men like Alexander Graham Bell, oralism kept a very prestigious position in deaf pedagogy for decades, only being challenged in the 60s thanks to the work of pioneering researchers like Ursula Bellugi and William Stokoe, who showed that sign languages have sublexical structure and phonology and grammar all of their own, including unique structures, which started a whole revolution in linguistics. As sign gained more legitimacy, oralism is weakened, but has unfortunately never quite left us. But I think we've gotten enough context now. Let's start to learn some of that mysterious sign grammar, shall we?
Signed and oral languages have a lot of differences in the grammar arising from different modality constraints. Speech generally operates in one dimension, sometimes two, while sign has all of 3D space to use. Speech also only uses one articulator, the vocal tract, while sign has both hands, the eyes, nose, and mouth, as well as the body itself. Speech does have advantages, though, in being faster than sign and in being more sensitive to timing units. All of those effects lead to sign languages preferring to simultaneously stack several morphemes into one or two syllables, while spoken languages tend to string things out. Earlier I mentioned sign parameters, but I should probably explain more. Most signs are specified for all 5 parameters, with some exceptions. The most important parameter is movement, which makes the nucleus of a sign syllable. Next is location, or where the sign goes. Locations are bounded to an area known as the sign box, the shape of which varies by language. Then there's hand shape, probably the most obvious part of sign phonology to hearing people. The final 2 parameters, orientation and non-manual markers, are important more so for grammatical functions rather than for phonetic functions. Parameters can be thought of as the surface features of the sign, but underlyingly there's a lot of debate about how syllables are actually arranged. Tzasang is influenced by the prosodic model, which divides syllables into 2 branches. Inherent features include the hand shape, including what fingers are selected within, as well as the location of the syllable. Prosodic features include all kinds of movements, even rotations and changes in hand shape. All features are specified once per syllable. Because of this structure, I tried to map sign syllables to single syllables in Tzasang. This had mixed results. We'll go from onset to coda and you'll see what I mean. We'll start with the onset. Ooh, look, a table. These are the hand shapes the sign language will be speaking, organized by finger selection and arrangement. Unmarked shapes are the most basic and common, and can be used in the non-dominant hand. Marked hand shapes are quite common too, appearing in the dominant hand or in both hands for symmetrical signs. Finally, restricted shapes have limited distributions based on semantic and or morphological rules, which will be described later. Ooh, wow, another table. This time, it's the phonemes of a lexifying oral language. It'll be used to source words and phones, so we're not going off of nothing. It's the ASL to our C2. Each phoneme has a hand shape associated with it based loosely on their respective feature geometry, as seen on these charts. These associations give us these consonant handshape pairs. D, T, C, G, K, P, A, B, P, T, S, Z, G, H, Nya, Na, Ma, Nga, Ya, Ra, Pra, La, La, Ba, Wa, Da, Sha, Ya, Za, Za, Ja, Da. Let's move on to the nucleus, which maps to movement as per the prosodic model. How to depict movements in 3D space with 1D speech. My immediate thought was to work with vowel space since it has multiple dimensions. Height and depth map right to height and fronting, but how would I get a third dimension? Rounding was an option, but it just didn't feel quite right. So instead, I did the only rational thing and deconstructed vowel space into its component formants. Easy. Formants are the loudest resonances generated by the vocal tract when making a sonnet. The first 2 are the most important, with the third being a little bit stranger. Don't worry though, for this all you need to know is the following. F1, size of the pharynx, vowel height. F2, size of the mouth, fronting and rounding. F3, shaping of the tongue, which can vary but I showed with rhoticity. And yes, that means this language has rhotic versions of every vowel, and also has double rhotic vowels. Oops! This just keeps F3 as granular as F1 and F2. And thus, space is arranged like so. A to marks height, E to O marks depth, and A to marks left-right. Notice too that the scale of rhoticity is determined by hand dominance, not by absolute direction. This means the language has two chirolects, determined by the speaker's handedness, kinda like in sign languages. For simplicity, we'll stick with the left chirolect, cause I'm left-handed. So, to show a movement in space, just put some vowels in hiatus to show what path is taken. A smooth movement will have smooth hiatus, while a jerky or shaky movement can be shown with creaky voice. Location follows pretty clearly from this. Locations in neutral space can be specified with our vowel system. But what about locations on the body? For this, I divided the upper body into 3 zones: the head, the torso, and the arms. Then, to further subdivide each area, vowels are arranged linearly down that body part based on their F2 minus F1 values, with the rhoticity feature marking the non-dominant side. Each body area is associated with a different nasal coda, where the nasal murmur marks the location as not being in neutral space. A preceding vowel is then read as a body location. And now we get to orientation, which literally took me weeks to decide on. I ended up dissecting it into a separate pre-syllable, which made it easier to separate the location and movement portions. Gross palm orientation is marked with a sibilant that indicates roughly which direction it faces, as seen on this figure. Rotation-related orientation is shown with F2 minus F1 values again, this time showing how the radio-ulnar joint is rotated. For simplicity, orientation is only indicated when strictly necessary. And finally, we have non-manual markers, which are used for modal, syntactic, and prosodic notions. These map mostly to Toang-style grammatical tones, with a couple dissected particles. First we have the topic marker, pretty standard eyebrow raise. This maps to a high tone. Then there's squinting and tongue out for intensive, mapped to a low falling tone. Questions marked with a nose wrinkle get a rising tone. Finally, negation, which is signed by biting down, gets mapped to a sharply falling tone. Some tonotactics apply to make sequences nicer. Non-manual markers touch on the syntax of the language, which, like most sign languages, is topic prominent. Default word order is head initial, with adverbial phrases preferring to come sentence finally. And now, it's been long enough. Let's talk about spatial grammar and anaphora. The most basic operation of sign space is the index, which functions like a pronoun. You can make a pronoun for any given noun by saying it and then pointing in space. That area then becomes an anaphor for that noun in the discourse. If you're a fellow Lojbanus, this works just like goi koha. In Tzasang, this replaces all of the pronouns of the spoken language with ka, where the vowel marks where the index is. Now that we have persons, we can do person marking. Most sign languages have a class of verbs that can take verb agreement, either with just an absolutive argument or with both an agent and a patient. Agreement is shown very simply by taking a verb and moving it from subject position to object position. Since movement is shown with vowels in Tzasang, agreement is also marked with vowels. One can say tsoe, I tell you, or flip the vowels for tseo, you tell me, easy. Some verbs also take locative agreement, moving from one location to another. Same idea though with the vowel changes. Got it? Good. Now, let's go on to entity classifiers, which depict some form in space. The hand shape indicates what that form is, whether a person, a vehicle, flat surface, a serpent, you name it. They function as verbs grammatically and can also sometimes take agreement. Think of them like little puppets you can use to act out parts of a sentence, but more grammar-y. They're spoken with their corresponding hand-shape consonant and movement vowel. Pretty standard stuff here. Sign languages also use handle classifiers, which indicate how an object is handled. The hand shape generally represents how something is handled, whether in a wide grip, a hook, like a pen, maybe a delicate hold, or whatever else. These are very sensitive to orientation because they refer to handling, so they always take an orientation pre-syllable. That and context can distinguish them from entity classifiers. More complex classifier constructions involve 2 or more classifiers, either in a ground-figure relationship or a simultaneous relationship. To mark two classifiers as being in a relationship, a final ul is appended to their syllables, as the anti-resonance in F3 binds each syllable together. Simultaneous constructions are very helpful for complex locative and adpositional notions, as well as to express various kinds of discourse relationships. Take this construction in ASL, for example, which translates to "the paper is right of the pen." You can see the long-form classifier on the left of the flat object classifier. Sometimes, in complex classifier constructions, you'll have to restate a classifier. In this case, there's an abbreviation in Tzasang for this. Simply replace the vowel of the classifier with a syllabic ul, similar to the ul suffix. Perfection. Here, we'll take a quick break to talk about something a bit more familiar. Tam. Everyone loves Tam, right? Anyway, the base sign language operates under a present-non-present system. Quite simple, with the non-present being marked with the following adverb. The same word also marks conditionals and can imply hypotheticals when paired with a forward lean. By default, verbs are imperfective, but can become perfective by decreasing their movement, or durative by increasing and repeating movement. This maps to reduplication in Tzasang. Mood is mostly indicated prosodically or through adverbs, though sentences can also start with functional particles like see or consider. Now that we've pretty clearly established the shapes of words, we can talk about how they go together in discourse. In sign languages, role shift involves shifting the torso and/or eye gaze to distinguish between different elements. This is useful for comparatives, describing one thing, shifting, and describing the other, as well as for quotation and impersonation. You can shift into an index area and then speak for its referent. In this language, the comparative function also takes intensive marking, as that acts as a way to signal contrastive focus. To indicate role shift verbally, there are two dissected particles, va for where the shoulders move, and pla for the direction of the head movement. And finally, I wanted to touch on two kinds of derivation that involve switching the hand shape of a word. First is a process called initialization, where a word's hand shape is changed to another one, usually based off of fingerspelling conventions. So in ASL you can take doctor and replace it with a D for doctor. Fun! You can also switch out the shape for an N and get nurse. C2 uses these prolifically, so I decided to incorporate them into Tzasang. Simply switch out the initial consonant when applicable. The second process is numeral incorporation. In this sign language, numbers 1 through 5 can be incorporated into some words, such as indexes, time words, money amounts, and ranking words. This is done by switching the hand shape of the root with the associated number.
Alright, let's take a sec to breathe. I know, that was a lot. Now, we're going to take a look at the translation text rendered in our base sign language. Try and notice some of the spatial features at work. To help you understand it better, there'll be a little gloss off to the side as well. And then, after that, we're going to take a look at a couple sentences and see how they actually get converted into Tzasang. So, without further ado,
We're going to break down two sentences, one simple and one complex. Let's start with the first sentence, which has 4 words. The first word means see, used to show the sentence as new information. The spoken language word for look at is be, and so we can take that and mark it for its movement. The hand goes from the face outwards in order to agree with the serpent, applying the coordinates of ui, and boom, we have a spoken sign. Next is the sign for snake. The spoken word is su, which needs no change. Then there's this word, which roughly means kingly or noble. The best equivalent in the lexifier is to take the word for king, xa, and combine it with a particle referring to the quality of a noun, yielding xadhul. The low tone references the fall in brow height, too. And finally, there's a sign for seems like, which can be spoken with the root meaning similar. Thus, the complete first sentence, maybe a little boring? Okay, let's try another sentence then. Bam! This six-word beauty is a sign-spatial complex, translating out of the language as the bones crack and it drinks what trickles out, as if the bone were a faucet of heaven. Let's explore more to see how the meaning is constructed and how to approach speaking it. The first word means bones and is topicalized. The spoken word is du, but this particular word requires an initial hl. Then we add a tone for topic marking, giving a final product of hl. The next word is where things start getting fun. Take that sign for bones and split it in half. This is a poetic way to lead into discussing marrow, which is inside of the bones. At this point, the word takes on a more classificatory role in the phrase, so we can build spoken words from the ground up to show the action. The shape stays the same, so we keep hl in the onset. Next, we want to show the downward movement in the dominant hand. The classifiers are pretty high up, so we can start around and then fall dramatically down to ah. Then we add a low tone for intensive marking. The right hand stays still during this, which can be indicated with just a simple plus rhoticity to show that it's the opposite hand. Finally, since these words act as simultaneous classifiers, this can be specified by suffixing each with a final giving klul. Next, there's a particle to show the head moving down relative to neutral space. This is best shown with that head particle, tl, marking for downward movement, giving tl. With the head in place, we can move on to the sign, which uses classifiers to describe trickling from the bone to the mouth. Starting on the left, this hand shape goes with d for the onset. Next, downward movement, giving wa. But since the path motion ends at the mouth, we add a vowel based on F2 minus F1 values and a nasal coda. For the mouth, this yields om. Finally, since there's an additional movement note of finger fluttering, the whole word is made creaky. This word gets matched with the right-hand bone classifier from earlier, which can now be reduced to flul, yielding flul for this sign. Our next sign means similar to or alike and is prototypically an agreeing verb, but in this case acts a bit more as an adverb or light verb. It still takes subject agreement though, since the subject is patientive. We can use the spoken root d as a base, and since it agrees with the bone classifier, we can copy that vowel, giving dir, phew. Thankfully, this next word is easy. It just means heaven, best corresponding to the spoken root biang. Since the hand shape is restricted and significant for meaning, the spoken word gets an initial psa. It also takes a low tone intensive marker for contrastive focus, giving psiang. We're in the home stretch now. Next is another classifier assigned where the last word was. Its shape and location represent a spout coming from heaven. Because of the change in palm direction, we need an orientation specifier. The palm points up, mapping to sha, and since there's no rotation node, we can get away with a neutral schwa and move to the main root. The hand shape maps to and the sign is high and right in neutral space, giving All that together gives us salur. And finally, the last word. This sign is almost identical to the trickling one from earlier, so I'll gloss over it. We end up with da'ong as before to mark trickling, which is then followed by hlul to mark the spout classifier it comes from. Put everything together, and the sentence is spoken like so. Hlo hlo hlul, klua da'ong hlul, jerpsiang, salu da'ong hlul. Not as compact as the original signs, but it's not too far off. And, at long last, we're ready. Here is the full translation text, rendered in Tzasang. Buisuk satkoa, klut magur, bieng wo zaur, klut, psaimo zoya sang uk woimotsang. Zain! Boy wo tsar zhizhong, zor, om. To tarja tulbsing, psalhuwal, towat, chluhluahlu doong lul, jerhum sing, shalul doang lul, bui susur kutsa lar flut junga, zhaong tao doao. Tie ki tabsing o hunsha, kawel palmun ka, biok woimotsang. And there we have it. One can now speak a sign language.
I mentioned earlier how one of my goals with this was to make it as one-to-one as possible by mapping single sign syllables to single oral syllables. And as we've seen, that didn't really pan out, and the language only functions with these little particles and affixes added all over the place. But I'm actually very happy that I did not meet this goal. The result I got from translating the text is an unwieldy, overly precise yet information-losing mess that only functions as a language laterally because its base is a language. It's garbage that requires such overly precise, fine distinctions in vowel quality that it's impossible to understand or use as a real person. And don't get me wrong, I'm very proud of all the work I did to make this thing, but it just does such a disservice to oral and sign language alike. Cross-modal relexes like these can be useful, and I do actually have a couple of uses for Tzasang in mind, but they're just not right as someone's main mode of communication, and I really hope that's come across here. Could you imagine having to speak this way constantly? Having your language be so belittled that this was seen as a better alternative to it? I certainly hope not, but unfortunately, that's the reality of the world that many of us live in. In any case, thank you so much for watching to the end, and if you like what you've seen here, consider voting for me. Il a trouvé su clama.